Hello again. Here's an example that has shown up a few times on the AP packet. It's similar to the ones on the packet, and they give you a graph and then they ask you to choose the inequality, the correct inequality. And this is very common on the AP test. They like to have graphs and inequalities put together, and then they make you determine the correct one. And many people, many students get these wrong because they look at the answer choices right away and then they get a little distracted by them and they think it must be a very complicated question because look at those inequalities and there's probably no way to ever get it right, or it must take a long time to figure this out. But it's actually a simple enough question if you know what to look for. And all you have to do is look at the items that they're comparing. In this case, it's f prime, f double prime, and then f at the same value at 2. So then on your own, figure out, let's start with f. And what do you know about f of 2? Well, the only thing I know about f of 2 at this point in time is that it's right there. F of 2, somewhere here. And I don't really know what the value is, but I know it's below the x-axis. And so that makes f of 2 negative. And that's the important thing. So f of 2 is negative. Now, what do you know about f prime of 2? Well, just remember the definition of the derivative. It's the slope of the tangent line. And so because it's f prime of 2, it's the slope of the line tangent to f at x equals 2. So what you should do is try and draw the tangent line at 2. And what can you say about that slope? Well, it's clear that it's a horizontal tangent line. So f prime of 2 is 0. And you can already see that it's easy to compare these two. One is negative and one is 0. And then the last thing is to talk about f double prime of 2. Notice that I'm not even paying attention to the answer choices. I'm just looking at the fact that I need information about f prime, f double prime, and then I stop looking at the answer choices and I just try to figure them out individually. So what about f prime of 2? Well, f is just a y value. F prime is the slope of the tangent line. And f double prime, what information does that convey about the graph? You got it. F double prime is the concavity of the graph. So at 2, what's the concavity of the graph? To me, it looks concave up, like a cup, right? If you look at the area, this general area at 2, concave up. And so then, if the graph is concave up, what does that say about f double prime? It is positive. And now you have all the elements needed to figure out the inequalities. Now, looking at the inequalities, you have less than signs. And more often than not, that's what they use, a compound inequality with less than signs. So if I look at this one here, letter A, it says that f double prime of 2 should be less than f of 2, which means f of 2 is greater than f double prime of 2. But then f of 2 needs to be less than f prime of 2. So then that makes f double prime the least value and f prime of 2 the greatest. Least to greatest. That's what you should realize about the anytime you have those less than signs. When there's two of them, it's just going least to greatest, and then the one in between, that's the intermediate value. So let's look at our result down here, and which one is the least? Well, the negative one is the least, so we should have f of 2 first. And then which is the intermediate one, the in-between one? Well, between a negative and a positive, you should have f prime. So then f prime of 2 is in between. And then the greatest one is the positive one. So f double prime of 2. And then you can have whichever inequality you're interested in, the less than inequality. Okay? So when you think about it, a negative is going to be less than 0, and then 0 is going to be less than a positive. And that's how we work these out. So looking at our answer choices, looks like letter E matches what we have, and so now we can select it and say that E is the right answer. Anytime you get questions like this, you're always going to end up with something that's negative, something that's positive, something that's 0. And so look for those three elements, a negative, a positive, and 0. And it all goes back to your understanding of what does f of 2 mean? That's just the y value when x is 2, and that was a negative y value. F prime of 2, the slope of the tangent line. According to my picture, that would be 0. And then f double prime, the concavity, and it's very clear always if it's concave up or concave down. And so now I'll try another question. Here's example 43 on page 38, and I wanted to talk about this one here. It's similar to the question that we went over in the first video that I sent to you guys yesterday, I think, because they want to know when the function is, well, it's not quite the same, but you'll see right now. This one says if g is a differentiable function such that g of x is less than 0, but we've trained ourselves not to say g of x is less than 0. Instead, we should be thinking g is a differentiable function such that g of x is negative for all real numbers x. And f prime, some other function f prime is equal to x squared minus 4 quantity times g of x. Notice that we have no idea what this g of x is. They just talked about g and that it's negative, and there it is again, but we're not allowed to look at it. We don't know what it is. But f prime is equal to this product of x squared minus 4 times g of x. Which of the following is true? And again, please don't dwell on the answer choices and trying to figure out from the answer choices what must be the right answer. What you should do is work on your own separately, and then at the end come back and take a look at the answer choices. But never ever spend your time just trying to figure out the answer from these. You should look at them just to get an overall idea of, okay, what are they addressing here? And then that's your starting point. And then you stop looking at it, work on it, and then at the end come back and select the right answer. So then let me see what the answer choices are about. F has a relative max at x equals negative 2, relative min at x equals 2. Looks like B, C, D, and E. It's some variation of this is where the relative maximum happens and this is where the relative minimum happens. Or choice E says there's no way to figure out relative maxima or relative minima. So then it's about relative maxima and relative minima. And that's all I really need to know about the answer choices. So I'm just gonna get rid of those and not even look at them for a little while. How about right there? So don't be distracted by them. And now that I know that the question is about relative extrema, then how do you find relative max or relative min? Well, first you find critical values. And see, I don't need the answer choices for this. This is just something that we know. And how do I find critical values? Well, it's the answer choices are talking about f. So then I need to take f prime and set it equal to 0, or f prime and set it equal to undefined. And what is f prime? Well, they gave us f prime. It's right there. So then x squared minus 4 times g of x, right? That's f prime, equal to 0. And x squared minus 4 times g of x equal to undefined. Let's talk about the undefined function. X squared minus 4, it's a quadratic. G of x, we don't know much about g of x, but they didn't really give us any information about it, so there's no reason to believe that this will ever be undefined. Or they would have mentioned something special about g of x. And so then we're going to say this won't happen. We don't have to worry about those. No critical values will come out of it. But now let's concentrate on this one here then. X squared minus 4 times g of x has to be equal to 0. And it's already a factor form. And so let's use the 0 factor property because it's equal to 0. So then we can say either x squared minus 4 is equal to 0 or g of x is equal to 0. And then let's solve for x. Well, here we get that x squared is equal to 4. And when we take the square root of those, we'll get that x is equal to plus or minus 2. And g of x equal to 0, we shouldn't despair. Just think about what they said about g of x. Way over here they said g of x is negative. That's a fact. So will g of x ever be 0? Nope. That just means we're not going to get critical values out of this. So don't worry about g of x being 0. It will not be 0. And so then these are the only critical values. Remember, the answer choices are talking about will we have a relative max or a relative min. So that's the first step, find the critical values. Then after you find the critical values, what's the next step? To figure out if you have relative max or relative min. Well, we can certainly try the first derivative test. Why not the second derivative test? Because if I take the second derivative, imagine taking the second derivative of this. We could do that. It would be a product rule. But then wouldn't we end up with a g prime at one point if you take the derivative of this? And they do mention something about g of x, but they mention nothing about g prime of x. And that tells me maybe I shouldn't go into the second derivative. So I'll try the first derivative test. And so that means make a number line, call it x. Remember these? Plot your critical values. And then figure out if you have positives or negatives or something else. So we're going to test values to the left of -2, something like -3. We could try 0. Whoa. Zero, and we could try 3. And where do we plug them in? We plug them into the first derivative because it's called the first derivative test. So let me just write my first derivative here. It's x squared minus 4 times g of x. Okay? And so then I need to take negative 3 and plug it into this x, but also plug it into this g of x. And we are interested on the signs, whether we're going to have a positive or negative. So then let's try let's put the negative 3 into x squared minus 4. That would be negative 3 squared, 9. 9 minus 4, that is a positive, isn't it? Positive. But now what about g of negative 3, because it's multiplying this? Well, remember, g of x is less than 0 for all real numbers x, which means it doesn't matter what x you plug in, g of x is always going to be less than 0 or negative. So then that makes it easier, because then I can say, hey, g of x is always going to be negative. So now just worry about the first factor, x squared minus 4. So let's do that here. Plug in a 0 into x squared minus 4. You get 0 squared minus 4. That's a negative. And if I try 3 now into x squared minus 4, 3 squared 9 minus 4, that's a positive. And then go ahead and multiply them. Positive times negative, negative times negative, positive times negative. And we end up with negative, positive, and negative. Now remember, this is f prime, right? It was f prime. So then, what does the first derivative tell us? Well, if I look at the fact that to the left of negative 2, it was a negative first derivative, then f is, think about it, decreasing. Did you say decreasing? I sure hope so. Then in between, f prime is positive. What does that tell you about f? F is, well, it's much easier now, increasing. And then to the right of 2, f is increasing. Oh, not increasing, I'm sorry, decreasing, because the slope was negative. Okay, so then just let's have a quick sketch of what this graph may look like. Decreasing, increasing, decreasing, decreasing, increasing, decreasing. Huh. So now I know what's happening. What do you call that? Relative min. What do you call that? Relative max. And see, this is how you take AP tests. Now we can come back. Remember the answer choices? Well, now it's when we look at them and which one says exactly what we found out. That I should have a relative min at negative 2 and a relative max at 2. I think letter B was the one. It's a very good example. It's a nice problem. It makes you think. I hope you enjoyed it.